On a personal note, it is an honor to call Judith both a colleague and a friend. I met Judith years ago through my work in the Academy for Eating Disorders, and she was the first clinician I encountered after my daughter had been in treatment for about 5 years at that point, who valued parents and who respected us as partners in treatment. As such, Judith empowered me to find my voice in the AED and to use it. Throughout the years, I have turned to her to ask for advice, and I've come to cherish her wisdom. It is therefore a true personal privilege for me to be here today co-hosting this webinar with Judith. So let's get started.
Thank you, Judy. I would say the honor is all mine. I respect so much the journey that you've gone through and our friendship, and look forward to having our discussion today. And in some way, I want to reframe what's happening because I don't see myself as the presenter today. Judy and I talked about this in advance. Also, side note, you have two Judys here, so we'll just be bouncing that back and forth, and you'll have to maybe, I don't know, if you have specific questions for each of us, define us somehow separately. Anyway, when we talked about doing this presentation, which is the first one we've done together, we decided that having a conversation between the two of us would be the most interesting format. As it turns out, there's not a lot of literature that in the field of eating disorders that applies to the sibling experience. There's the body of research that's been done is preliminary and primarily has focused on finding out whether or not siblings are affected, how much, and in what ways, and clearly finding kind of affirmative answers to those questions, in the sense that yes, siblings are affected in multiple ways, which I can sort of describe in a second, but there's not a lot of literature out there, or there's not much available information about guidelines or suggestions or strategies for families to fall back on to help. And so that's what we want to focus on today. Judy has generously agreed to let me ask her questions about her own experience, which is, like I said, quite deep experience, and she's gained a lot of wisdom. And we're going to use that as the fulcrum for our discussion today, is what Judy has learned, what advice she has from her own experience, what worked for her and her family. And going back to what the research has shown us is that yes, siblings are affected. This is not a surprise to any of us, but they are affected in some in varying degrees, depending on, as in all things, eating disorder, and lots of different variables. We know that siblings can be profoundly affected in the sense of feeling responsible, feeling guilty, feeling depressed or anxious. Their own issues can be exacerbated. Some siblings step up and decide that they're going to become part of a caregiver regimen for their sibling, and they try to submerge some of their own needs and take on more responsibility, and that works for a while. And for some of those siblings, they burn out, and then they find that the best thing that they can do is separate from the family. It really is a kind of a grab bag of not only impact, but also ways that siblings try to cope. And so what I've seen in my clinical practice fits with what the research shows, and I think what Judy has seen too in her experience, in that it is all over the map, how the rest of the family is affected, and that we can assume and take for granted that all ages of the siblings can be affected, even from very little on up. So I think it'll be important for us today to be realizing that we're talking about a wide age span of sibling, gender. We're talking about different types of eating disorders. We're talking about a lot of different things, but what our hope is that we can get a good discussion going and at least begin to collect or compile a list of strategies that can help siblings persevere, maybe even thrive in this difficult situation. Along those lines, one of the areas that we looked at in trying to prepare was the literature that addresses severe mental illness and how that affects siblings. And there was a meta-analysis that came up with 3 guidelines for strategies, and these I'll summarize the 3 of them that Judy and I kind of quickly went, these are inadequate for our needs, but it's a good jumping off point for us. And so these 3 guidelines are for siblings to help them is to provide, number 1, knowledge and education. I think we all would probably agree on that one. That understanding more what's going on helps to reduce blame and targeting their sibling and blaming them. And the second suggestion or recommendation is to provide peer support or arrange for peer support for siblings. We've got some comments about that. And then the third is to look for a silver lining, which we can understand, in some situations might be feasible and might be possible. But again, we have some ideas and thoughts about that. And taking these 3 guidelines as a jumping off point, knowledge and education, peer support, and looking for a silver lining. Judy, I wonder if you'd be willing to go into, you came up with over 10 really, I thought, incredibly important and helpful thoughts and guidelines and suggestions, advice, even just summarizing your own experience, if you'd be willing to talk a little bit about that.
Sure, thank you. So, I mean, my first thought here is that siblings should never be the food police. And that's something, I mean, there was one time in the entire span of years that my daughter had an eating disorder that, we had to leave one of her sisters in charge. We were stuck somewhere, we couldn't get home. But we made it clear that, she was just to sit with her sister. She didn't have to make sure she ate everything. She didn't have to report back to us. But it was really important for us. And I think it's really important across the board. Siblings should be siblings. The relationship should be purely, a family relationship. It shouldn't be enforcement of, eating or rules or, after eating supervision. That should not fall to siblings. So that was kind of my first thought. And my thought after that is that, siblings are really in an awful position because they see behaviors that they know are dangerous, that they know are problematic, that they know, go against treatment. And, there was a situation with my kids that, my daughter vomited into the bathroom sink and she clogged it, and it was the middle of the night. And she called one of her sisters, and her sister literally took apart, the plumbing on the bottom of the sink, and didn't tell me. And there were so many situations that I only found out after the fact, that, my kids covered for their sister. And I know that they were tormented because they knew that, her behaviors were dangerous. They knew that they should tell someone, but they knew that if they told me or my husband or anyone else, it would violate their sibling relationship and it would cause a rift between them. And they wanted to preserve that relationship. So I think we have to really understand that, our kids are really stuck. They're stuck between us as parents and their sibling, and they're really conflicted about what to do. So, what I would say personally is, if you're ever in a situation where one of your kids does not tell you something, even if it was dangerous, just be understanding that they really felt that awful tormented conflict and they just felt like they couldn't. And, Judy, you talked about, the age range of kids. My youngest was 7 at the time when his sister, got sick. And I thought he was too young to understand much. We didn't explain very much to him, other than the fact that, his sister, we explained an eating disorder and he obviously saw what was going on at home, but we didn't give him any details. We didn't really give him any education per se, because he was 7. And only afterwards, his teacher actually called me. We did tell our kids. I think every family has kind of their own privacy policy. And we did try to keep it private because I didn't want to violate my daughter's privacy. But on the other hand, her siblings needed support, and they needed their friends and their teachers and other people in their lives to know what was going on so they could be there for them. So we basically told our kids it wasn't a secret. We weren't ashamed of it. It wasn't an embarrassment. it was an illness, but it was my daughter's private, business, and that they were allowed to seek support from whoever they thought needed to know, but to be discretionary about it. And my kids are, they're wise and we trusted them. And my 7-year-old didn't have any friends, obviously, who could offer support or relate. So intuitively, he went to a few of his teachers and he told them what was going on and he included them on what he was feeling. And one of his teachers called me. And I remember sitting on that little chair, in a second grade classroom, and I started to cry because I didn't realize that he understood as much as he did, or that he was as impacted as he was, because he was so young. So, it made me realize that even younger kids really do need to know what's going on. Obviously, each kid at their own level, but, I feel like when you hide it from kids, it makes them feel like there's a stigma or a shame or an embarrassment or something wrong with their family. And, I never wanted that for my own family. And, I hope no one else wants that for theirs, because it just exacerbates things when you have to live under this shroud of secrecy. And, another thing that we were talking about is that I think we have to acknowledge that siblings get hurt. They get very hurt. I mean, in our case, in our family, my kids are triplets and they were never close, like, couldn't stay apart from each other close, but they were siblings in the same age. And, all of a sudden, my daughter with an eating disorder, she kind of cut off from her sisters. And, whereas they used to come to her and talk to her and, she would help them, she all of a sudden kind of put up this wall, and they were really hurt and they were really angry and they didn't know how to deal with it, on top of the fact that she was sick. So they had the guilt that they couldn't blame her because she was sick, but they were feeling so hurt and so vulnerable. And I don't think that we fully were able to recognize that, because, when your child has an eating disorder, especially in the beginning, you're so steeped in crisis that you can't, that's where your attention is. And I think that's normal. And I think I probably share that with a lot of people here, that, in the beginning, you dedicate your attention, to that one child, and the other children get what's left. But it's really hard. I mean, that part was really, really hard.
Yeah, I wanted to just tag on to that, just as even as a prelude to talking about this, is we recognize, and I think we all have to understand that what's being asked here is the impossible. That you have to focus all of your attention and take care of the child who's has the eating disorder, and then you also have to pay attention to all, I don't know how many or whatever children you've got, like the rest of the children in the family, and make sure that they're okay. And then you're also supposed to do self-care, right? And then make sure your marriage is okay. And then if you have an ailing parent, so that I'll shut up in a second, but just that we do understand that the basic groundwork, the basic framework that we're working within is doing the impossible. Okay, so I
That's
think that's what you're talking about.
beyond true. That really is beyond true. And, when people say, oh, you need to practice self-care, it's almost like a joke. It's like, and when will I do that exactly? In the 30 seconds and 24 hours that I might have to myself, it's just, it's almost ridiculous. And, I see both sides of it, meaning obviously self-care is important, but I also understand how unfeasible it is for so many parents out there caring for a child with an eating disorder to even contemplate, self-care. I mean, you do little tiny things that, that take care of yourself, but not in the way that people think of self-care. And just adding on to what you said, parents, they get stuck in the middle. I mean, I know that I was stuck in the middle because, my kids would complain about their sister and about her illness and how it was, ruining their life and our family and everything else. And I saw that. I mean, they were 100% right. But on the other hand, I didn't want to malign my daughter with an eating disorder because it wasn't her fault. And I found myself playing referee between my kids, and wanting to validate everyone and understanding that it's not possible, meaning, it put me in a really awful position of basically being between my kids, and not wanting to hurt anyone and wanting to support everyone. And I don't think I really understood how important validation was back then. I used to think validation, so I'm telling someone that their feelings are valid. How is that going to help? And I understand now that it really would have helped. I wasn't validating enough to my other kids. And I think had I said to them, you're right, her behavior really hurts you. I understand why you're upset. Just statements like that, that at the time, X amount of years ago, I didn't really see the value in. Now I actually really do see the value in validating my other kids and making them feel, like their feelings are important, even if there's nothing I can do about it. Because I'm kind of like a practical person. Like if I can't do anything about it, I'm probably not going to address it. And that was the wrong approach. I mean, I can look back now and say, I should have said, there's nothing I can do about it, and you have a right to be heard. And I understand why you feel this way. So there's a lot of things in retrospect that we see, only in hindsight,
Sure.
and that's definitely one of them.
Yeah, I think in hindsight, right, always 2020. Because we're always learning, we're always like when we can look back and we're not in the pressure of the situation at the moment, our minds open up and we can see other kinds of options. The difficulty when you're under that kind of level of 24/7 stress and fear and behaviors that you have to manage and responsibility, what happens to people, regardless of whether it's an eating disorder, whatever's going on, but people lock in, and then you manage the stress by just staying on your track and like, don't bother me with new stuff. Don't give me new things because I've just found a way to hang on by a thread doing the stuff that I'm doing. And so, I mean, that, I guess that's just, again, describing, that's just what happens to all of us when we're under duress, that we just lock in and we get real, we can be extremely rigid. Um, and so I guess I'm just saying that as a way of, I don't know, offering some compassion and, knowing that as we talk about this stuff, we're talking about, what to do in an ideal situation.
And this is not ideal. I mean, it's never
Right.
ideal. And I think the message that it's really important to send to siblings is it's going to be okay. No matter what happens, it's going to be okay. And that was a message. I mean, my daughter was sick for a long time, and that was a message that we constantly sent to our kids. And I think it was really important to reduce their anxiety and to give them a feeling that we're going to get through this. And on a positive side, I'd like to say that I saw in my own kids that the relationships, which were so fraught and so torn apart by my daughter's eating disorder, were mended. And mended, really fully mended. And they even became closer, not because of the eating disorder, but they became closer because they were able to put, the past in the past and kind of organically, put their relationship back on track. And, a lot of parents are so, frightened that their kids will never again have the same relationship. And I would like to say that, I don't know about your kids, but I can say with mine, that they were able to get their relationship back and, to become friends again and to be back in each other's lives and in a really meaningful way. And, that's something that was really important to me. And I really appreciated it. I mean, every time I saw my kids, together laughing or hanging out or whatever it was, I couldn't help but think back to a time when they really didn't have that relationship and they couldn't stand to be in the same room together. And so I do want to say that, I think that there's a lot of hope in the fact that it will get better, despite what it looks like now for parents who are really in the thick of it. And I also want to say that, it's really, as you said, it's an impossible situation. We're, two parents or one parent in some cases, and more than one child, and everyone needs attention. And sometimes you have to be creative. The first summer that my daughter was sick, it was going to be summer vacation, and I didn't want my kids just sitting around doing nothing, visiting their sister in the hospital or us not being home because we were visiting her in the hospital. So we decided, my husband and I were going to split. I live in Israel and we have a lot of relatives in the States. So I started out in the States for 2 weeks with my kids doing really fun things while my husband stayed home to be with my daughter who was in the hospital. And then midway point, we flew. I flew back to Israel. Literally, we saw each other for like 6 hours. And then he headed off to the airport to be with my other kids. And I stayed to be with my daughter in the hospital. And it was a month of the two of us being apart. But my kids got a month of a really fun vacation, being spoiled by family. And it was something they really, really needed. And sometimes you have to think out of the box. And it's hard because you feel guilt. I mean, that I'm sure every parent relates to that. You feel guilt all around. No matter what you do, you're feeling guilty. And I think that if you try really hard to be creative, the other thing that I think helps in my case was I had friends who said, what can we do for your other kids? Meaning they realized that it wasn't necessarily about helping us, it was about helping my kids. And we had friends that stepped in and, they would take my kids to a movie, or they would take them out for dinner, or they would just invite them over, kind of for cookies and milk type of thing. And in our case, it was really helpful to have somebody else give my kids attention when we couldn't. Anything?
Oh,
Judy, do you have any, I don't want to hog the conversation. I'd like to give you the chance to,
oh, no, no, no. And I was looking at our notes to make sure that I want to hear all the things you have to say. Make sure you get it all in.
okay.
But yeah, with that comment, I think, the, first of all, I thought the idea of going on separate vacations, I understand that may not be feasible for lots of different people, but that kind of idea, even if it is sort of even one parent going out with the kids one evening or whatever it is, um, that's a brilliant idea. And it's like understanding and being able to say even to the family, like, this isn't perfect. This isn't what we would want us all to be able to go. But in lieu of that, here is something we can do. And it sort of helps kids understand that sometimes, when things are real difficult, that this is not a time for perfectionism. This is a time for finding things you can do that are good enough and can be fun enough. And maybe they're not like the old days or that kind of thing, but it's something you can do in the interim, and it does make a big difference. And I think, again, it keeps speaking to that, kind of trying to do the impossible and the no-win quality of the situation, where everything you do for this person over here inevitably takes a little bit away. In the big picture, it's for everybody, but they're like, in the moment, it takes away from this child, or it takes away from that child, or it takes away from your spouse. And so once that, I think that reality becomes just accepted and understood, it makes a lot of these I want to say solutions, but these ideas and suggestions more feasible, because it's like, it's having to accept that we're making the best of a tough situation.
Yes. And I mean, part of the, like every stage of the illness is different, but, I found the beginning stage of the refeeding process on the family to be the most difficult, because, we are demanded to be, sitting opposite our daughter for many, many hours a day, in the kitchen, which didn't free me up to do anything for anyone else. And, I want to say that refeeding has to be a priority. And, you have to put that effort in, and you have to put that time in, and knowing that it is going to compromise your other kids. And, if you're lucky enough to have a spouse or a partner or some other family member who can come in and fill in the gap, and you can kind of split, that's great. And if you can't, then the priority has to be the sick child, because, if you don't take care of it, then that child's only going to get sicker. But I can say that I think it's really important to have one ritual or one thing a day that you do with your other kids, which each of your other kids, whether it's a bedtime story with kids who are younger, whether it's sitting and doing homework for half an hour with kids who are older, whether it's watching a 20-minute show on Netflix, find like one thing and do it consistently with your kids every day. Because, even just one thing, even just 20 minutes out of 24 hours can make a really big difference in making your kids feel like you're there for them. I mean, it's pretty amazing. One of my daughters wrote me a letter, like, a few years ago and said that she never felt like I wasn't there for her, which is really a miracle because I wasn't. I mean, I wasn't there, for my other kids. I mean, I was, I mean, laundry was folded and everyone, got their permission slips for school and their lunches were made and, all that stuff was done, but I wasn't there. And, it's something that still stays with me. And I understand that I couldn't be there, but I'm really glad that she felt that I was, because that's really important to me. And there was one more point that I had. Um, sorry.
One of the things, privacy and confidentiality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was right. That was the last one. And look, this is going to be different for every family. And I can only tell you what we did. I can't tell anyone else what to do, and I wouldn't presume to tell anyone else what to do. But I know, it's people's nature, and there's different cultural norms on this to try to hide an eating disorder. To try to you just don't want to expose it to everyone. You don't want people to know your business. You don't want people to know you're struggling. You don't want people to know your family's in crisis. But when you do that, I think that it's only to the detriment of the whole family. First of all, it means people can't help you because they don't know you need help. And I found with my own friends, I read articles on when your child has cancer, people bring you casseroles. When your child has an eating disorder, no one does. That was not the case for me. And I think it's not the case for a lot of other people. I think if your friends and family really understood what you were going through and how much you're struggling and how much you need, they would come forward to help you. And you need to let them know that you need help, because the bottom line is you do need help. And, we all like to think we can do it all. This is not one of those circumstances where you can do it all. I mean, no one is that superhuman that they can manage it all. So my recommendation is to really let people who care about you, who you can trust, who will be discreet, who will keep your confidence. You don't have to broadcast it to the whole world. You don't put it on Facebook, but I think you are allowed to violate your child's privacy for the sake of the rest of your family and your own sanity. You can carefully let people know the help that you need and see if they'll step forward and they'll help you. And the other thing is, I know people who have not disclosed to their other kids that their sibling has an eating disorder. They don't want to tell even people in their own family. And, I think if I did that, my daughter would have gotten the message that we were ashamed or we were embarrassed. And my other kids certainly would have gotten that message. If something was so secret and so hidden, then it must be like a dirty secret. And I really didn't want that feeling. I think, we always talk about eating disorders being, brain-based biological disorders. They're not choices. And I think if you really want to, talk the talk, you have to walk the walk. And you have to say, this is an illness like all other illnesses. My child is sick, like she would be sick with anything else. And, this is the situation. And I think that people are really still, very, I don't know, I guess absorbed with privacy. And, we did tell my daughter at a certain point that we were going to be asking for help. And she understood it. I don't think I asked. I think I told her that this is a situation, but my daughter never would have wanted her siblings to be unsupported or us to be unsupported. I mean, most people with eating disorders are family people, they care about their family, and they would never want their family to suffer any more than they have to. So I really think that it's very important, for the sake of the siblings and for the sake of the family, to be as honest and open as you feel comfortable with, to accept help that's offered to you, because ultimately it's going to help your other kids, and it'll definitely make them feel a lot more normal, like they're from a normal family, than if you try to hide it.
I think that what you talked about, Judy, like I mean, I think of the clients that I work with often don't want anybody to know. Don't tell anybody. Maybe you could tell a couple of my teachers so I can get some help with school or that kind of thing. But, I don't want other people to know. But I can understand that for them. And, just that it's private and they don't want people looking at them when they get back to school. But I have found that kids understand, if you're talking about the way that you describe it, is that we're going to let these certain people in, that they're part of our larger family, and that we have, our family, and all the people that we've got that all the needs and your brother and sister need to get to these practices and those practices. We have to be able to tell people, and we're proud of you. Because I think that the not wanting people to know also goes to feeling that they don't want to embarrass their family. And that if you as a parent go, we're proud of how hard you're working. We're proud that you've been open about this. We know how hard it is, and we're all just going to join together and we've got assemble a team. We've got the treatment team, but we also need to extend our family team to make this work. And I think that goes a long way to at least there's a team that this person has, that the child has, who they do not stigmatize the illness or the person. And that's it creates a safe, I don't want to even say bubble, I wish there was a bubble, but at least a safety cushion for them. and
No,
and
it's
I
definitely
do.
important.
Yeah, yeah. And I think uh the issue, and I know that it may be certainly, in as a therapist, that we're very careful about client confidentiality, all those kinds of things, but I do think there are times that the parent has to make executive decisions about how to proceed. And if it means not necessarily letting the child in on all the things that you're doing or whatever, then you simply have to do that, because there is the what is at stake as much it can be repaired, any kind of confidentiality breaches, whatever that you've done for the sake of your child and your family can be mended later on, because of the just the urgency of the situation. And so I think that's just a reality that parents live with, that
I
sometimes.
agree. And one of the other things that, I wanted to mention, unrelated, was I didn't send my kids to therapy, um, earlier on, because I didn't see that they needed it. I mean, they seemed pretty well adjusted. They all had friends. They were all doing the teen or the younger kid thing. And they seemed to be doing okay with their sister's illness. And, only afterwards we realized, hey, these kids have a lot of anxiety. They need a lot of help. And, my other three kids have all gone to therapy since, and it's really, really helped them. So, I just want to say that, what you see from the outside may not reflect the reality of how your child is doing. Also, a lot of times, our children see how stressed we are. They see how anxious we are. They see how distressed we are, and they don't want to add to our distress. So I think a lot of times siblings hide their feelings. They don't want to come to us and bother us. And so we don't actually really know what they're going through, what we see on the outside. And also, I think, if I'm being really honest as a parent, we want to see that they're okay, because we're
Right,
dealing with so much
right.
with our sick child that we can't even contemplate dealing with more. So I think, to a degree, we see what we want to see, not in a bad way. I think we're all really good parents, but I think when you're in that situation of absolute crisis, you just do your best. And so I just want to say that I think it's really important, to evaluate seriously whether your other kids need therapy, because I think they can all really benefit from it, each having their own safe space where they can talk about things with somebody who was only theirs, who they're just able to really share what's inside of them, let it out. And I think it's very beneficial for siblings.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Judy. I think that some kids, everybody's different, but some kids will respond to the strain in the family, or the emergency in the family, by not being able to manage themselves, and they go off the rails. So you have not only the child with the eating disorder, but then you have a sibling who's going off the rails in other ways. But what I see more commonly is what you described: are siblings looking and going, "Ooh, this ship could sink. I really need to just keep rowing and just not be a problem." And I think there was a comment, I just glanced at the chat, and there was a comment in there about even siblings who might be developing eating disorders themselves, or disordered eating, or dysregulated eating, because that is a risk. I mean, we know that there's like even a psychological contagion when there's someone in your environment, who has an eating disorder. And what a lot of families find is they get one child settled and into a strong path of recovery, and then discover later on that there was another child who was struggling but didn't tell anybody, and you couldn't see it because the laser focus is on the child who's immediately drowning, and it's just a hazard. It's a hazard of the situation. And um and I don't know that there's a solution other than what you're talking about, Judy, is making sure that at least periodically that the other kids, that the other kids get some sort of a therapeutic ear or therapeutic experience, but also I I think that what you talked about with in terms of validating um, can start to give the rest of the kids permission to not be doing so well too, you know, in a sense like that the the almost not that they're necessarily going to like if you have a very responsible child sibling who's like trying to just really be a helper and just be carry on and that kind of thing, they may not necessarily let their guard down, um, but at some point they may feel that it's safe to start to do that and that you won't blame them and that kind of thing. So it just creates a more receptive environment. But
I agree.
yeah.
And one of the things we talked about in our kind of pre-conversation, you had talked about assigning roles to different family members, including siblings. And maybe you want to talk about that a little bit, because I think that could be a good strategy for parents.
um Years ago, and I think I stumbled on this when where there was like family systems therapy was a big thing back in yesteryear. I started working in the field in the 70s, and family systems therapy was sort of popular. And in the process of learning about that or whatever, I stumbled on a book called the Healing Families, the Simonton Method. The Simontons were a team of physicians who specialized in cancer treatments. And in this Healing Families book, I think it was by one of the daughters, one of the ideas, the one that stuck in my head was that when you're trying to get through a chronic illness that is um, very impinging on family life, it can help for everyone in the family, in the extended family, to figure out what are they good at, what is something that they can contribute to the recovery process or to their sibling or the family that is sustainable and that can be their it can be their purview. So for example, when talking to Judy about it, I gave the example, even a little child, if they know their sister is sick, maybe they get to pick out a stuffed animal for their sister once a week, and they at the store or the online, or I don't care how, this is just the idea that maybe they get to find a stuffed animal for their sister, or another sibling is really good, they are really happy to hop in the car and run to the store and get extra supplies at any given time. um, or if a brother who he's good at fixing things. So that's his job, is going to be fixing things in the house during this period of time. Maybe it's not a direct service to offer the sibling, but it helps the family. So it's that kind of idea that everybody has something that they don't have to. It's not a 24/7 job. It's a job that they can just do and take responsibility for, and then it helps reduce the guilt, because the idea is that everybody is contributing in their own way, and that it helps just the wheel keep turning in that way. And it does, because I think the burnout is a big thing, and we don't want the rest of the kids to get burned out and then feel like they have to leave the family to get relief. That it's like trying to have it be where they can do what they can do, and then it's okay if they're sitting there watching television, not helping, I mean, in that sense. Like they have to be able to live their lives within the home too.
Which is hard. I mean, it's really hard when, home is hell. And, for a while, my kids couldn't bring their friends home, and they didn't want to. I'm not saying they did not want to bring their friends home. Um, and I didn't blame them. I mean, our home was not a happy place. It was not a place where you want to bring your friends. You never know when there's going to be the next explosion. And I know a lot of families are like that. And I think, it's really important, to take family time when you can, even if it's little snippets, even if it's watching a TV show, whatever it is, preserve what you can. And it'll all come back later. It will. But, when you're in the thick of it and when, things are really bad, just grab little moments of your kids together. For us, music was a big part of our family. We always had music in the kitchen, and my kids would kind of make a playlist of things that they knew their sister liked. And, they would sing and dance, and it kind of made things easier and more bearable. And, different people in the family had their jobs. My youngest, his job was to make his sister happy. And it was a job he took upon himself. And I feel bad in retrospect because it was a burden on him. And I didn't see it because he was 7 and it wasn't visible, but I think every sibling tries to take on a role. And I think as a parent, we have to make sure that the role isn't too much.
That's right.
That the role is suitable for them, that it's not too much, and to let them know it's okay if they're burned out and they don't want to do it anymore. It's okay. And it's hard. These are not conversations that are natural. They're not conversations that come up, when you're chatting about how was your day. So I think you really have to make time and space to have those conversations and to say to your kids, how are you really? You can tell me, how are you really? And make sure that they always feel like there's someone there for them. And even if it can't be you, if you have a friend or grandma or an aunt or someone in the family who can step in and just be there, I just think it's really important for all siblings to have at least one person who can really be there for them. And I know we'd all like it to be us as parents, but in the situations when it can't be, there can be other people who can take our place temporarily and help our other kids through it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's yeah, I think it is, I think if we all know, aside from working with, our own families or working with a child with an eating disorder, that the pandemic has shown us how it's that things can happen that make you have to pivot in your life and realize that, ooh, we have a new normal, and that new normal involves new ways of talking to each other, and these things have to develop quickly. And um and I think that's what happens when you have critical illness suddenly in the family, and something like an eating disorder where it takes, it's not just medication distribution, is like wrestling with somebody. Sometimes it's intense. So I think, Judy, what you're saying about having new kinds of conversations and talking in different ways and much more directly and more frankly with kids is one of the things that helps. I noticed that we have a lot of questions, or not we have comments that are long and interesting. So I wonder if we want to.
Yeah, Ellen, who's our board chair, is going to take over and moderate so that we don't have to look back and forth
Oh,
and
okay.
ask ourselves questions. So
Good,
Ellen, you can ask
good.
us questions.
You want me to go ahead and start? All right. Hello, everyone. It's nice to meet everyone here. Hopefully my internet will behave while I'm trying to moderate this. So one of the first questions we got, and we've talked about this a little bit, but to see specifically Judy, brunette Judy. I'm going to call you brunette Judy and blonde Judy. That's how we can distinguish the two of you. So brunette Judy, in your clinical sense, in terms of when you do therapy with families, do you do specific work with parents?
Okay, and our internet did cut out.
Okay. I think this might be Michael Levine's question or comment. Hey, Michael.
I want to answer that after you're done, even
Yeah.
though it wasn't for blonde Judy. After you're done, I'd like to put my 2 cents in there too.
Okay. I believe siblings are also at risk for that's the one we're talking about, I think.
Yeah.
In terms of
Of eating disorders or other mental disorders. So do you, in family-oriented therapy, work with parents or other caretakers to prevent a second person in the family from developing? Yes. That's my answer. Yes, that as a clinician, I'm I'm always scanning and listening to see it, like doing damage control. That if there's a sense that there might be somebody else developing issues, then we figure out some way and to, without trying to overwhelm the parents or the family, but to get that child seen for an evaluation and to see if there's some way of getting them going in treatment themselves. Because the understanding is that if something is starting to happen, it does need to be addressed, and that if we wait, we know what happens. It just gets worse.
And I just want to add to that, that I think as parents, I mean, I understand that we're already, stressed out to the max, but I think as parents, we really have to understand when we say eating disorders are genetic, that means that our other kids are at risk.
Yeah.
And I think we always, always have to just have that in the back of our mind. Make sure you see them eating, make sure they're not restricting, keep an eye on them, more so than before. And I think you also, when you have one child with an eating disorder, you develop, your instincts become more developed. And when another child, gets into a danger zone, hopefully, you see the warning signs. I mean, personally, I remember the day that, my second daughter, I opened a notebook that she left lying, like on her bed. I mean, it wasn't a private thing. It was like a math notebook. And I saw a calorie count and my heart froze. I mean, I can't even describe, I was paralyzed because I was like, oh my God, not again. And, it really was a wake up call to me that, I know that I have one child with an eating disorder that just makes my other kids vulnerable. And I really, as a parent, have to pay attention to that and have to be aware of that. And, I really just have to really have my finger on the pulse and make sure that they're okay. So I just wanted to answer that from the parent side of, yes, as parents, we really, really, really have to internalize the fact that genetics are genetics and predisposition is predisposition. And it doesn't mean that our other kids will get an eating disorder, but they're more likely to develop an eating disorder. So we have to be ready to step in if we see any warning signs and take care of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Great, thank you guys. Another question, this is a couple part question. So one is, there's somebody online who has a relatively younger child, so 9 years old, along with a very small toddler. But her question is twofold. One was, is there any books or videos that you could recommend? And we did get one recommendation in the chat itself, to help talk to her 9-year-old about what his older sister is going through. And then the second part of the question is related to what should be communicated to his teachers, his school, in terms of the eating disorder, what should be told to those teachers, because I think there's he's having some challenges in school, obviously potentially related to what's going on with his older sister.
I can respond to the school part, which, we were very, forthcoming with information to our kids' teachers, because we knew they didn't need, it wasn't just support, they needed understanding. There were times when they couldn't hand in their assignments. Our house was a war zone. They didn't have the focus to do their homework. And I needed the teacher to be able to understand that and to recognize that it wasn't their fault. So I was very proactive and I did contact my kids' teachers. I think for a 9-year-old, you really do have to speak to a teacher and explain what's going on in the home and to try to enlist the teacher's help. I mean, maybe there's also extra people in school, who can be, with your son, who can give him, kind of a listening ear or just extra love, whatever it is. But I definitely think that you have to share with your kids' teachers, obviously when it's appropriate. I don't know that I'd share with a college professor, but for a 9-year-old, yeah, I think you have to let the school, if there's a guidance counselor in the school, the guidance counselor should be advised as what's going on. And sometimes they can give, like in my son's school, they were able to give him someone who's kind of like a big brother, like an older student. I mean, my son was in 2nd grade, so his kid was maybe in 8th grade, but it was just someone who came in, played sports with him during recess. Like it wasn't anything big. It was just that extra figure just to give him a little bit more attention. So I do, and I do think that it's really important. 9-year-olds understand a lot. And I think it's really important for them. One of the most important things is to explain that it's not the sibling's fault. This is an illness. It's not their fault. I think if you can remove some of the anger you remove some of the hurt. I think the hurt and the anger really go hand in hand. And I think it makes their heart feel better if they know that it's not their sibling's fault. It's not a cry for attention. It's not a choice. It's an illness. It doesn't eradicate the anger. It doesn't eradicate the hurt, but I think that it does mitigate it somewhat.
I agree. Making that really clear over and over again, because I think it's like one of those illnesses that you have to just keep reminding yourself too, everyone in the family, that this is not, it is not a choice, and that the person with the eating disorder is suffering more than anybody in the group. And I wanted to also mention, because you talked about college professors, Judy, and I, I work in Ann Arbor, and so I see a lot of University of Michigan students, and I am writing notes to professors every day. You know, that I'm seeing your student in therapy for blah, 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 and, is going through a relapse or having a hard time. Could use a little break on exams or assignments, blah, 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 the next stretch, or can't make classes. And it is rare. Overwhelmingly, the professors are extremely generous. They will talk about, they have an eating disorder in their family. They'll bend over backwards for the students, and they become an ally for the students. And that never stops warming my heart, just realizing there are a lot of very supportive people out there. And for the little ones too. And I think the book that was mentioned in the thing is, it's by Brian Lask, and Lask. You can find it on Amazon, and it's Can I Tell You About Eating Disorders? A Guide for Friends, Family, and Professionals. But it gives you the good words to use when you're talking to people of all ages.
Great. This is probably a good segue into another question here that we had around, there's somebody on the line who's got a child who is an older child in her early 20s now, who's now recovered. She's got younger siblings who are also in their late teens, who are not interested in talking about, having therapy, doing individual therapy, making the comment that they just want to move on. The question was, are there any suggestions or experiences to share in this kind of instance? The daughter who was suffering from anorexia had been ill for quite a long while. Obviously, there was hospitalizations, residential treatment, so on and so forth. Any thoughts on this space?
I mean, I'll just comment and say, what I did, I mean, there was no magic involved in my kids' relationship. It was just a matter of time and to some degree opportunity. I made a big effort to take my kids out. We went to the movies. I took my girls, to a show. My daughter loved, going to shows. I took them to the ballet. I mean, there were just things that I did with them. I didn't force them together per se. I mean, again, 3 daughters, we went out and we got manicures together. I tried to find things that all of my kids would like, that they would all enjoy, obviously age appropriate, gender appropriate. But, I didn't make them spend time together, but I chose activities that made them want to spend time together. And I found that slowly but surely, by kind of pushing them together, and I let it happen organically. It wasn't my place to intervene. It wasn't my relationship, and I was very aware of that. But I did try to facilitate them being together to whatever degree they could, and do fun things together to try to rediscover why they liked each other, what they had before. And, that worked for me. And again, there's no magic pill. It doesn't happen overnight, but in time, families do mend, and I thank God they do.
And I think if I understand, part of the question or part of the comment was that the other kids didn't want to have anything to do with therapy. Is that correct? Or
Yeah,
did I
that's in
miss it?
there.
Yeah,
Um,
that they weren't interested in therapy at this point. They just wanted to move on.
yeah, and I think that fits in with what Judy's saying, is that I wouldn't force them. I wouldn't, because I would think that it's natural, like they want to be able to stop thinking about things being wrong. Let's just get on with life. But I think what Judy's talking about too is make sure you spend time with those kids, and do family stuff, and keep an ear out they may just need a break from it all, and they may be absolutely right. So it's not something you want to push down, push on them. But if you want to keep an ear out and just go, cool, I get it, but if it maybe down the road sometime or whatever, we keep the door open, and if not, great. But I would be saying, okay, fine, 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 and then I'd be keeping my ears and eyes open, everything wide open, and spending time with them and talking with them and listening just about their lives in general and that kind of thing. So just be aware that they are at risk.
And also keep the offer, I would keep the offer open for therapy, meaning they may not accept it now, but maybe in 6 months or in a year, they want it and they may not know how to ask for it. So I would just keep mentioning it as an, open thing. It's always available if you ever want it. And, you'll find that it's possible at some point that they really will want it, even if they don't want it now.
Yeah.
They will want to heal, and they'll realize it's not behind them. This is not something that you put behind you. This is something that, there's no shortcuts. You have to go through it. And I think that at some point, people need help going through it. And I think that you have to tell your kids there's nothing wrong with needing help going through it. And, the help's available if and when you ever want it. But just keep making the offer, because they may not come to you and ask for it, but at some point they really might want it.
Exactly. I've seen that happen over and over again. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll actually personally validate. My daughter had been recovered for 2 years, and I kept offering about every 4 to 6 months for my son to get therapy. And he finally came back this summer and said, I'd like to go see a therapist. So, it's great. So
Yep.
it does happen exactly the way you described.
Okay.
So we are very close to the end. Any closing thoughts, Judy, you or Judy would like to have before we just kind of wrap up here? I think we've gone through most of the questions that people had shared.
I just personally Judy, thank you for sharing your personal wisdom, because we've talked about the lack of resources, and I think that what you've had to share today, for me, just even as a clinician, is really, really valuable. And I think we ought to write these down in a formal way.
Well, hopefully we are going to write them down. And I want to thank everyone for joining us. I mean, Ellen, you'll close us up. But I want to thank everyone for joining us. This was a different format than the rest of our webinars. Usually it's a presentation, and this was more of a conversation or discussion. And I really hope that you all benefited and gained something from it.
Yes.
Great. So I'll just kind of close up here briefly and just let everyone know that we are going to be continuing to do the seminars into 2022. So keep posted for the schedule for that. And then if you've enjoyed this and like this type of programming, we do also always want to give everybody an opportunity to contribute to FEAST so we can continue this type of educational platform. We think this webinar format works really well. The screen sort of shows where you can go if you have an interest in donating to FEAST. It's mainly on our main website, and there's a big donate button right there. And then the final slide I think we have is just reminding everybody to keep posted. We're going to be publishing the schedule. We'll have coming out additional webinars that'll be going on in 2022. Along with that, probably we'll make a pitch that in March, at the end of March, we'll be having our Feast of Knowledge, which is a big sort of one-day program bringing together lots of the very well-known clinicians in the field, along with parents, to discuss some key elements that everybody may be interested in related to eating disorder treatment, best practices, practical guides, current research. So keep all that in the back of your head. And with that, I think we were at the end of our time, and I will thank everyone again for participating. And thank you, Judith, and thank you, Judy, both of you, for spending your time and sharing everything with us as you did so freely.
Thank you. Thanks for your moderation.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.